Perfect. And we are live. I want to thank everyone for tuning in to a very special edition of Off the Record on the People's Podcast this afternoon. We have a magnificent guest today, one who is going to give us some amazing information as well as inspiration, and that is none other than our brother, Dr. Anthony. Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Wa alaikum salam. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you very. First of all, happy Father's Day to you and all
Happy
of the
Father's Day
fathers
to
who are
you.
watching. Yes, sir.
Likewise, happy Father's Day to all the brothers out there.
Yes, sir. Okay, so the first question that we have for you today, sir, is when did you first hear the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad?
I stumbled upon a magazine. It was a Ebony magazine, and it had a article about Muhammad Ali, and that's when I started to become introduced to the teachings of Elijah Muhammad. I saw him in his FOI uniform, and then of course the brothers used to stop by the house and sell the fish prior to 1975, and they used to, sell. My father used to buy the Muhammad Speaks at the time, but by the time I was old enough to try to get involved with the nation or to become a part of the nation was no longer around. Nation was gone. It fell. And so I became a part of the Five Percenters, because the Five Percenters was the only thing around in New York at the time. They were teaching the lessons, and many of the brothers and sisters who came into the New York mosque in the early days of the rebuilding came from the Five Percenters. It was, brother Minister Abdul Hafiz, he was one. Brother Steve, he was a minister in Queens. Sister Sharima, we all came out of the Five Percenters. And because that's what was around at that time. The nation wasn't around. And it wasn't until 1980 or 81, the minister came to Harlem and he did the magnificent speech, The Time and What Must Be Done, in Harlem. And that's when I realized the nation was starting, the real rebuilding process. And at that time, I still wasn't coming out to the mosque at the time because I didn't know where the brothers and sisters were at. But that speech inspired me a lot. I was always inquiring when I was reading the lessons about this Elijah Muhammad. Who is Elijah Muhammad? Who is Master W.D. Farrar? Because these were in the lessons. But I wanted to get more information about who these individuals were. So I started reading Message of the Black Man, and by the time, I was ripe to come to the nation. As I said again, the nation wasn't around. So about 1981 is when I first heard the minister speak. That was my first time hearing the minister speak, myself and brother Jamel Shabazz, the photographer, the famous photographer. Him and I went together, and we were so impressed by the FOI and how they searched us, and the way brothers were just so organized, and so it wasn't until maybe 6 months later, after Savior's Day 81, we saw brothers on the train, and that's when we met brother Abdul Haq Muhammad, who is at that time was brother Ronald X Stokes, I believe was brother Ronald. He was the captain at that time for New York, and he invited us to come to the Wisco Manor in the Bronx, and then later on to the Harlem State Office building, and that's when we first started going out to the meetings.
Powerful history, yes sir, yes sir. And people are showing you love all across the country. Walaikum salam. My sister Miriam is sending greetings. Walaikum salam, and thank you everyone who's watching. Can't wait to put this on YouTube. Okay, I want to go back to what you said. The nation, it was the fall. What did the fall look like in New York to you when there wasn't before the 5% Nation? You just didn't see no Nation of Islam. What did that look like?
Well, when the fall, I was used to seeing the steak and takes, restaurants, the brothers on the corners looking sharp, selling the paper. I was used to seeing, the sisters in their white, their refinement, looking sharp, the brothers going to school, and I was inquisitive about that. My family was staunch Catholics. So even though they respected the Muslims, it was no way that I was too young to go to a meeting on my own. It wasn't until I was about 12 or 13 that I was able to kind of venture out, and by that time, by 1975, about 75, 76, the nation pretty much the way we knew the nation was gone. And the only thing that was around was the Ansar Allah community and the Nation of Gods and Earths, the 5%ers. And they were the ones who were teaching the lessons. Okay, they were around teaching the lessons, and so that attracted me. Their lessons attracted me, and I give praise and honor to the 5%ers for being around at that juncture of time, because if it wasn't for them, the lessons wouldn't have known anything about the lessons, and I wouldn't have been inspired to read Message of the Black Man and How to Eat to Live and want to learn more about the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and learn more about Master Farad Muhammad. I wouldn't want it, I wouldn't have known, because it wasn't talked about. They didn't talk about the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Master Farad Muhammad in the 5% Nation. They talked about Clarence 13X, or they talked about Puddin. That was his name, Clarence 13X, and so on. So that's what was talked about at that time. I came into the 5% Nation in the 70s, so it was probably like 77, 78. I came into the 5%ers, and I pretty much stayed in the 5%ers until 1980, right after the speech the minister gave. And that's when I began to feel a little bit dissatisfied about the 5%ers, because I was looking for more structure and more discipline. And I think many of the brothers and sisters who were in the 5%er who came into the nation, they also felt that way as well. They were looking for that structure and discipline. And so that's how I ended up coming to the Nation of Islam.
Oh, praise to Allah. Wonderful. Yes, sir. Okay, great. Now you come into the nation, and it's the early days. So is the Honorable Minister Farrakhan, is he coming to New York quite a bit during those times?
He was coming to New York, and what the minister would do, it was magnificent. He had study groups in different parts of the country. Brother Jabril was working the West Coast, and he was working the East Coast, and they would have study groups in different parts, and one study group wouldn't know about the other study group. So that way, if it got infiltrated, it wouldn't affect the other study group. And so it started out as a study group, and then eventually it evolved into a temple. And so by the time I came in 80, in 81, it was after Savior's Day, 81, I came in. I was very active after that time. I went through orientation. It was a temple. We were on 1110 Eastern Parkway. 1110 Eastern Parkway. The minister at that time, or the student minister at that time, was Minister Kareem Muhammad. And back then he was called Brother Linward. And Brother Linward was from New Jersey. And so Brother Linward never wanted to be the minister. Very beautiful brother, never wanted to be the minister. He said, I never wanted to be the minister. But the Honorable Louis Farrakhan made him the minister, and knew that he was from New Jersey and that he would face opposition from the New Yorkers, because he was from New Jersey. But the minister wanted him to be the minister because we wanted to The minister wanted to break up all of this, pettiness about you're from Jersey and you're from Philly and you're from this, locate. We FOI. We all from FOI. We all recite the same general orders. We all recite the same lessons. There's none of this, you from Jersey, you from Plainfield, you from Philly, you from Newark, you from there. We all unified together. And so Minister Kareem made an effort to have Unity Sundays. And all of the different mosques, all up and down the East Coast, we would gather in New York and have Unity Sundays. And we would get to know our brothers and sisters from Newark, Plainfield, Atlantic City, Bridgeport, Washington, D.C. At that time, the minister in D.C. was Brother Maurice, who is now Dr. Alim.
Yes,
okay, sir. Right? So, and then it was Abdul Qadir, who's now the minister in Washington. He was the minister in Newark. Okay, and so we used to have FOI classes together. We used to have FOI classes together, and it was this concerted effort to keep us unified, and as a brotherhood. So we worked with the brothers in Jersey, in Bridgeport, in Boston, all up and down the East Coast. We worked the brothers. It was none of this petty rivalry, competition. It might be competition, but righteous competition, but not the petty rivalry. And the minister did not want that. And that was something that existed, unfortunately, prior to 75. That we didn't want to happen this time around. That he didn't want to happen this time around. So.
Excellent. Yeah. Yes, sir. Okay. Well, what advice would you give to the newer generations about the importance of unity and not being divided by like tribalism and things of that nature?
Yeah, we're all, as I said again, we all recite the same general orders. We all recite the same lessons. We all go to the same FOI class and we get the same instructions from the top. So we need to be unified. We need to be one mind, one accord. And we don't need to be divided. Righteous competition is okay. But when it gets out of hand, then needs a stop needs to be put to that. So righteous unity is what is needed. Well, in the way the brother Abdul Kareem Muhammad, the way he did it was very, very good. It was wonderful. I had to recite I remember reciting in front of the whole entire Unity Sunday FOI, and at the time. And I found out later that should not have happened. I should have just recited in front of the captain, but I had to recite in front of the whole Unity Sunday, and thankfully Allah, I got my X. And so I became Anthony 3X at the time. There was two other Anthonys ahead of me. There was Brother Lieutenant, he was lieutenant at the time, second officer, who's now Abdul Aziz, the martial artist, assistant supreme captain. He was there in New York time, and he was someone that I studied under Sanukas Rue. I studied with him and his brother Wayne and Chris. They were all there at that time, and it was a wonderful time. It was a wonderful mosque. It was a brotherhood. It was a brotherhood. Minister Kareem took us to his home, and he showed us his home. He wanted us to see where he lived. He says, "Brothers, I don't live in a palatial palace. So you might have these, in your mind that I live in a big palace, but this is where I live, and it's a very humble home. And the limousine that he drove in was something that was donated, I believe, to the mosque. So we quickly dispelled all of that he was, that he was wealthy and rich and had all of this money. And he was just a very down to earth, humble brother, and I thank Allah for him being there at the time, because in my spiritual awakening, So, and also Brother Wazir as well,
Mm,
who was my orientation instructor. And that was
mm,
Sister Aisha's first husband, I believe. I don't know if she's remarried, but she was there. Sister Aisha was in New York at the time. She was a secretary, and Brother Wazir was the secretary. And he was my orientation instructor.
mm,
Sharp brother. I mean, sharp like a tack. Nails were sharp and clean and suited up. And he was a musician. He could play piano. He was a martial artist, a black belt, and a CPA. Right.
mm.
So he was the right man to be over the orientation class because he was someone that you wanted to aspire to be like. He was clean, and very humble, on time. We started class on time. He was religious about that, and just overall a beautiful brother. May Allah bless him, grant him paradise. For all the good that he did.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Okay, great. And people are showing you love all across the country. Welcome, salam, alaikum, and thank you everyone who is watching. I want to go to Madison Square Garden, 1985. What was that experience like?
1985, man. Now at this time, I was now in Phoenix.
Oh, so you moved. Okay, so you moved.
So I
Okay,
had
okay.
moved. I left New York in 1983, August of 83. So I was in Phoenix at this time. I had now moved. I went to college at Arizona State University. And so I don't believe that I made it to Savior's Day 85. But some of the other brothers and sisters did. And they actually stayed at my parents' house.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, because I was in school at the time. Yeah.
Yes, yes, sir. So you graduate. Do you go back to New York once you graduate?
Well, I stayed in Phoenix for a number of years until 1989, maybe the earlier part of 90. And when I moved to Phoenix, that was an experience. Being with brother Jabril, and we used to call him Brother B, for Bernard, because his name was Bernard Kushmir at the
Yes,
time.
sir. Yes, sir.
And being under him and being in the community there, the mosque number 32 or the community, was just a phenomenal experience. It was phenomenal. The way he had us studying, it was like being in a university, because we had study guides that we had to study, and even to this day, some of the things that he taught us and instilled in us, I still do to this day. I remember he gave us an assignment that he wanted us to look at, he wanted us to look at the news on TV and read the paper and pull out 3 things from scripture and relate it to what we read on the newspaper and what we saw on TV.
Mm, mm,
Things of that nature, reading the whole Holy Quran, and at the time we would have to read, we didn't have the internet and different things, technology. We had to read the Holy Quran and find the word patience. How many times the word patience is in the Quran?
mm,
And this is before you could actually look it up on the internet. There was no internet, right? And he had us going door to door. And I remember that he was strict on that we would go door to door, and he wanted us to meet the people, greet the people, and hopefully start study groups out of that. And from that, that's how we were able to make friends and influence people and things of that nature. He had us reading books outside of the regular curriculum. He would have us reading books by Think and Grow Rich, Stop Living and Stop Worrying. He told us that these books were written by Shriners, by high-level Muslim Shriners that knew who we are, and so we would read these books and and we would go out and he would say, fish the dead, dead, get the dead and get the bread, DMB, the Dead and Bread program.
mm,
So
mm.
and so that was a phenomenal experience to be under. Coming
Oh,
from New York, where it was a whole different vibe, coming to Phoenix to the West Coast, where it was another kind of vibe, you know, was different.
powerful. Yes, sir. And how did your family and friends feel about you, joining the nation?
I lost a lot of friends, you know. Of course, when you move on, you know, I lost a lot of friends. I tried to bring them with me, but you know, they didn't come. Everyone, you know, they decided not to come, but they respected the nation. They respected my decision um, to move forward, and they saw the growth and the development. And I remember a friend of mine. He saw me one day. He said, "Man, you look like God." You know, after I came from a speech, I remember the minister made a speech at a church in Brooklyn. He came for, I think it was 6 weeks in a row on a Wednesday night in Brooklyn. And he came to a church and he spoke. And I was coming back home and the brother saw me. He said, "Man, you look like God. Where did you just come from?" I said, "I just came from hearing the minister, you know." So brothers, yeah, I lost friends, you know, family members gave me a hard time in the beginning, but then um they softened up when they saw the difference. You know, they saw that I wasn't hanging out as much. I wasn't getting into trouble. You know, my grades were getting better. You know, I started, you know, getting higher grades. Um, and but you know, so what I did is I turned that energy and I started teaching in my school, you
Mm,
know, in the high school. And so I was teaching and selling bean pies and giving papers to the point where it started to worry the administration.
mm,
And so they called my father and told my father, "Your son is in here converting people to Islam
mm.
and selling papers and pies and fish sandwiches, and we got to stop it, you know." And so they called my father up to the school and talked to my father and asked him if he could stop selling the papers and stuff. We're not going to throw him out, you know, because he's a good student. But and then I graduated and then I left. I think I stayed in New York one more year. I went to college. I went to John Jay College of Criminal Justice. And then in '83 is when I moved to Phoenix.
Powerful. Yes, sir. And thank you, everyone who is showing love all across the country. All right. So now, at what point do you go after Phoenix? Do you go back to New York?
After I left Phoenix, I went back to New York in '89. Um, and I was working for Smith Barney. I was working in finance. I worked for a bond house on 30 Wall Street, McLaughlin Piven Vogel. And then I transferred, left them and I went to Smith Barney. And I was working in the brokerage industry. And that's when I ran into Captain Yusuf Shah. That's when I met Captain Yusuf. Captain Shah worked at Don King headquarters. And I worked not too far away from Don King headquarters. So um, I ran into Captain Shah, and that's when Captain Shah and I began to take lunch together. And we used to take lunch and eat together when he wasn't busy driving Don King around or Joe Mafia or one of those other people, Miss Tupman. Him and I would sit and talk. And we developed a relationship. The last part of his life, from I would say from '89 to until he passed away in '93.
Mm,
We were very close. And in fact, when I moved back to Phoenix, because I did move back to Phoenix, um, he was in Las Vegas, and that's when I was able to get contact with him. Brother Jabril contacted me and asked if I could get Yusuf Shah, to come to Phoenix to sit with the minister. And that's when
mm.
I sent you those pictures of
Yes, sir.
when we got him to come to Phoenix. And it was around the time of the Spike Lee movie, when the Spike Lee movie came out.
Yes, sir. Which movies in particular?
The Malcolm X movie.
The Malcolm X movie. Okay, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes. And
Perfect.
and that's what I was, I think I was telling you that when last time I spoke to you, that the Abdul Rahman, the one who came out with his Netflix series, you know, um, one of the things I remember Brother Jabril teaching us in a series called "Who Backs Up Brother Farrakhan and with What." That was the first time I met Brother Jabril was in New York when he spoke on that, and he quoted from the Bible, First Peter 3 and I think it's First Peter 3 and 15, about being ready to defend what we believe. And so when Abdul Rahman came out with this Netflix thing, I saw into it something a little bit more deceptive and deceiving, about he's implying, he's trying to imply something, even though he's not saying it, and when he comes out with his second part, his part 2, I think he's really going to come out, it's going to become more than an implication. And one of the things that I would have to say about that is this, he's not talking to the followers of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad that knew Malcolm, okay? Like Sister Evelyn, she's still alive. Brother Jabril's still alive. There's many followers who are still alive who were with Malcolm. And that's what a lot of these authors do. They don't talk to the believers who were with Malcolm, who soldiered with Malcolm, who were with Malcolm, from 1952 on, until he left. Brother Najee's still around, and so on. So, we only get this one-sided view. We need to talk to those who were in the mosque with Malcolm, that Malcolm knew intimately. So at that session, when I brought Captain Shah, at that meeting, Sister Evelyn was there. Captain Abdullah, who was the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's captain in Phoenix, he was there. His secretary was there, Reginald. And also there was there were quite a few believers that were there that came, that knew Captain Shah, and they talked about Malcolm. And they talked about Malcolm, and it wasn't a bloodthirsty, he deserved what he got. It was a sincere, Shah said that Malcolm was attracted to the camera. He was attracted to the camera. He liked the camera. And Elijah Muhammad warned him about being in the colleges and universities and wanting to teach in the mosque, and Captain Shah said to me one day, Malcolm asked him, why is it that do you think the temple is not growing, brother? And Captain Shah told him, because you deviated. You stopped teaching the spiritual teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and you teaching all this political stuff and all this black nationalism. And, as a result, the numbers are going down. He said, when you first started teaching, I would have goosebumps on my arms because of the truth of what you were saying. And I heard that from Brother Jabril. Brother Jabril said when he first heard Malcolm speak, he was supposed to go out on a date that night with someone, and he decided not to go because of the truth of what Malcolm was teaching. So when Malcolm was teaching the spiritual teachings, right, from 52 until 60, 61, 62, right after the incident in Los Angeles, the mosque was packed. The mosque was packed. And, and there was a lesson in that for us. There's a lesson in that for us because history repeated itself again, because I remember when Brother Khalid, in Los Angeles, when he was first starting out, he was Malik Rashidin, Minister Malik Rashidin, and at the Black Topographical Research Institute, when he first started teaching, when he would teach spiritual teachings, I mean, the place was packed. When he started teaching all that, the white woman is the bee, and and all that other crazy stuff he was teaching, that tickles your ears. You know, you get a round clap, you get some laughs, but that's not changing my spirit.
Mm, mm.
You know, that's not getting rid of the brown germs that we need to get rid of, right? You know, so as I said again, going back to that night, no one at that meeting, there was not a dry eye because they really loved Malcolm. You know, they really loved Malcolm. You know, these were people who soldiered with Malcolm, who knew the different side of Malcolm, not the one where he's just pointing his finger up in the air. You know, they knew the real Malcolm. And this is what Abdul Rahman Muhammad needs to do. He needs to talk to the believers that are still alive, that knew Malcolm, and not be talking to people like Peter Goldberg and Peter Goldman and all these other people who don't know Malcolm, all right, and whatnot. But you want to talk to the people who are still alive that knew him. So you can get a balanced, unbiased view of who we're dealing with. But in either case, we must be ready to defend our minister because, as said, 1 Peter 3:15, we must be ready to defend him because these people are going to come after him because this man is implying that the minister might have something to do with Malcolm's, even though he's not saying it, I'm reading into it and I'm preparing myself because, you know, we must step up and be ready to defend our minister.
All praises to Allah. Excellent. Yes, sir, Anthony. And people are showing you love. Okay, so I want to go back to this meeting. What was said at the meeting that you think should be in the documentary, you think that we should know to help better defend?
What was in the meeting was that they were, Yusuf Shah did a lot of the speaking, and he was saying, you know, with tears in his eyes, he was saying that we could have saved them. We could have saved them, you know, but we got caught up. You know, we got caught up in we got caught up in the moment, you know, but we could have saved them. We could have saved them. And, you know, he liked that camera. I should have been more harder. I should have been more forthright with him, you know, but they weren't at that time, you know, that was the thing. It was a lot of regret that I got from that meeting, and which told me that it wasn't, they didn't have this bloodthirsty thing that you would hear from Abdul Rahman that the nation wanted him dead, you know, and all this type of stuff. No, there were people who genuinely loved Malcolm, you know, and was hoping that Malcolm would come back, you know. So at this meeting, what I witnessed, Brother Jabril was there. He was around taking pictures. Sister Evelyn, you know, a lot of the laborers who were around at that time when Malcolm went during that period in time were at that table, you know, and they wasn't saying anything, but they were in agreement with what Captain Shah was saying, because Captain Shah knew Malcolm better than anybody, you know, being with him since Detroit. You know, he knew Captain Shah knew him better than anybody. But now Captain Shah's gone. So we now have to rely on those who are still left. You know, Brother Reginald passed away. Captain Abdullah passed away. You know, a lot of people are passing away. So we need to interview these elders. We need to get them to start putting this stuff on paper, all right, or on your show, so we can have this body of information, you know, so when the onslaught comes, we're ready to have our defense.
Yes, sir. Now I wanted to ask you, Mother Evelyn, what did she say at the meeting? Did she say anything at the meeting?
She didn't say anything at the meeting. She was just observing. They were just very happy to see Captain Shah, because you have to remember, Sister Evelyn and Captain Shah, they knew each other when they were young, when they were almost teenagers. You know, these were people who knew each other when they were very young. You know, because he met Sister Evelyn in Boston. You know, Because Captain Shah told me that Malcolm brought him from Detroit, and he never found, which is a lie. This is a lie. People say that Malcolm found Captain Shah on the garbage can. No, that's not true at all. That's a lie, right? He was brought in, Yusuf Shah was brought into the mosque by another brother by the name of Jasper X. And Malcolm met Captain Shah in the mosque. And Malcolm realized that with his military background and his chef background, he had a background in culinary arts. He went to school, a trade school called Munger School of Trade and Trade School, Munger Trade School in Detroit, Michigan. And then when he went into the military, he learned, further, they put him working in the kitchen. So he had culinary background. So Malcolm realized that. And so when Malcolm started moving on the East Coast, which where did he go first? He first started in Springfield. He called Captain Shah, who at the time was making $150 a week. $150 a week in the 1950s was a lot of money. So he left that job because he loved the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and he loved what Malcolm was doing. And he said he was impressed with Malcolm. He was impressed with Malcolm. Malcolm was about trying to fill up the mosque, but he said that Malcolm could be kind of cagey sometimes. The word cagey, right? And he said that he would make a lot of friends, but he could make some enemies too. And one of the enemies that he made was the brother. You read this in the autobiography of Malcolm X, how he criticized the minister of Mosque number 1, Lemuel Hassan. Well, Lemuel Hassan's brother in Chicago was James Shabazz. Okay, it was James Shabazz, who was the minister in Chicago. So already there was, animosity for the young upstart Malcolm, even though he was doing good things and he was trying to bring people to the mosque. Sometimes he could rub people the wrong way. That's what Captain Shah said, that he could sometimes rub people the wrong way unintentionally and intentionally. But he went to Springfield and they started the mosque in Springfield, and they went to Boston. And then from Boston, they went to Philadelphia. And that's where Captain Shah met his wife. And then from Philadelphia, that's where he met Brother John Ali, and he met Jeremiah. All of them, he met them in Philadelphia. But the place that he wanted to be, Captain Shah said, was New York. Malcolm always wanted New York because that was the capital of finance and the capital, international capital for media. And that's where you wanted, that's where he really wanted to be. And he made the comment that Malcolm said that he would rather be an assistant minister in New York than to be a minister anywhere else. That's how much he wanted to be in New York, And so he ended up in New York, and he replaced the brother there that was over the New York Mosque at the time. He replaced him, and then eventually he brought Captain Shah to New York to get the FOI in shape.
I mean, amazing history. Yes, sir. And we have thank you. We have a few more questions for our brother Anthony, who's giving us some great detail. I know my historians who watch people's podcasts are going to be, can't wait to just soak up this information. You all can also go back and see the interview that I did with Minister James Najee, Brother Amir, Yusuf, Captain Shah's son, who I've interviewed in people's podcasts, and others, because I want to go back to the incident with the police when we come back from the 60-second commercial break, who were actually there in Los Angeles during the first the raid of the police where the brother was murdered. So we want to come back to that and hear what Captain Yusuf Shah had to say about that as well. 1 second. We have a quick 60-second commercial break for all of the sponsors of the People's Podcast. And we're getting right back to our brother Anthony, who's giving us, wow, this is incredible. Thank you very much, sir.
Camera and a drone. He does television and film editing. Please reach out to him if you need any of those services. Sister Miriam's ABC I Love Me, children's book and coloring book, and now Spanish book. All three available on Amazon.com. Sister Naima's Stay on Point Dance Academy, LLC. She teaches ballet virtually to young girls all across the country, right here in the studios of Atlanta, Georgia. Brother Kenneth's Bow Tie Maker Extraordinaire. He'll ship you bow ties anywhere across the nation. Dr. Henry Carter's King Henry Turkey Legs, right here in Atlanta, Georgia. Brother Rashad Muhammad's COVID-19 Disinfected Cleaning Services, out of Chicago. Student Minister Sharif Muhammad's book, A Soldier in the Movement of Christ, available on adulsharif.com. And lastly, Brother Joshua Muhammad's book, Cleopatra, as well as No Father, No Excuse, both available on Amazon. If you would like to donate or...
Thank you. We're right back to our brother Anthony, and people are showing you love, and we are grateful for this. So you spoke about the incident, but we want to clear it, for those who may be watching for the first time with the police in LA and how that affected Malcolm X's trajectory. Could you expound on that?
Yusuf Shah said that up until that time, he noticed that Malcolm was pretty much on course, but he said that incident is what changed him a lot. The brother who was the secretary was a good friend of Malcolm. And Malcolm, in fact, was one of the people who brought him out there or brought him to Los Angeles. So they were very good friends. And so when that incident took place, Malcolm wanted to take the FOI out there and kill all the police. And Elijah Muhammad told him that he said, and I'm paraphrasing, and this is what Yusuf Shah said. He says, "I didn't tell you that we weren't going to lose some people in this struggle. We are going to lose some people, but I'm not going to have you take my brothers out there to start a war, just because of your emotions, And so Malcolm didn't like that at all. He was very upset about that, and as a result of that, if you notice, after that incident, he no longer spoke. Like he would say, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said this, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said this, or Mr. Muhammad said this, and that changed. And he began teaching more black nationalism, more black political teachings. That's the way Shah would say, political teachings. And as a result of that, the numbers in the mosque went down, and he changed. That was the change. That was the and plus there were other things that were going on that Malcolm was dealing with. Of course, the envy and the jealousy from the other ministers, that were jealous of him and envious of him. And, Minister Farrakhan spoke about that happening. That's something that would happen. It happened to him. You'll get daggers in the back, but that's what changed. That's what changed them. He noticed that incident is what really changed his trajectory altogether. And he was never the same after that.
Wow. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All right, great. Well, in your life, sir, has there ever been a time when you were faced with fear? And if so, how have you overcome that fear?
Absolutely. The fear of death, the fear of dealing with disease and things of that nature, hypertension and so on. you know, and I think one of the things that helped me out a lot was the Dianetics.
Mm.
You know, I started using the Dianetics as a way to overcome, you know, some of the fears that I had. But then later on, I began to use it to get rid of some of the brown germ to purify my soul.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I'm gonna use the terminology that Brother Nuri used when I spoke to him in Baltimore. I asked him, I said, brother, he says, I know, I said, I can imagine all the daggers you got in your back, all the envy and jealousy. He said, yeah, brother, you know. I said, but let me ask you a question. What would you say is the secret to your success? What do you know? He says, well, I pattern myself after my teacher, you know. And I said, well, you know, do you use the Dianetics? He says, yes, I use it to purify my soul. I said, wow, that's it. You know, purifying my soul. And one of the things my wife will tell me every time I go to a Dianetics auditing, okay, she says, I don't snore. I sleep
Mm.
right through the night. I'm not restless. You know, I'm peaceful, right? Because I'm getting rid of those negatives.
Yes,
Right?
sir.
That's the way I use it, to get rid of the negatives, get rid of the brown germ, right? So I could become a God, a real
That's
God,
right.
right?
That's right.
So that's the tool. It's just a tool. You know, it's not for me to get hung up in Scientology. I'm not trying to be no Scientologist. I know who I am, but I'm using that tool, which the minister wants us to use to, you know, to get rid of some of these areas that can prevent us from becoming or realizing our full potential.
Powerful explanation. Yes, sir. It has done wonders in my life as well, sir. And many of the guests who come on have bear witness as well. All praises to Allah. Speaking of your wife, what advice would you give to future husbands?
Definitely to, you know, love your wife, take care of, you know, keep her first, listen, listen. You know, one of the things that Captain Shah would tell me all the time is that, listen, you know, if you're not good with money and she's good with money, then let her handle the money. There's nothing wrong with that. Y'all making money together. You know, be humble. Don't be chesty. You know, and that's what we do. We've been together for over 20 years. You know, been together for over 20 years now. You know, we have 4 daughters. My oldest just got her PhD in biochemistry.
Good.
The youngest is an interior designer. The next one is getting ready to go to college. And then I have the baby who's getting ready to go to high school. So, you know, Allah has blessed me with a wonderful family, you know, a wonderful life. You know, I wouldn't trade everything that I went through for the world. My experiences with Captain Shah, my experiences with Brother Jabril, you know, and him working with me and teaching me different things, you know, about, you know, the study group and the ministry and so on. I wouldn't trade any of that for the world. You know, I hear them in my head every day, you know, as I'm walking, when I'm getting ready to do something good or bad or watch someone, I hear them in my head.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You know, and I would love to see Brother Jabril. I would love to see him, but you know, it's been years since I saw him. But he's one that made an indelible impact in my life. You know, and may Allah bless him and grant him good health, and you know, he'll get over what he's going through, and you know, and get back, you know, and be with us, you know, more, because we're gonna need him.
Facts. Yes, sir. Praise be to Allah. What type of music do you listen to?
I listen to jazz. I listen to classical. If I want to lay down and rest, I listen to classical music. I listen to jazz, a lot of jazz music, hip hop. I listen to all different, various types of music. You know, I listen to all various artists. You know, it depends on the mood that I'm in. you know. But most of the time I would listen to jazz or you know, like I like Coltrane and things of that nature. Yeah.
Perfect. Yes, sir. All right. And I want to speak about, we have two more questions for you. And thank you, everybody who's showing love. We can't wait to put this on YouTube. The documentary, which I've watched multiple times, and you saying there's another one coming out. What advice would you give to people who want to defend our stance in that with the propaganda?
Study, you know, study. We have to study. What we didn't do prior to 1975, Brother Jabril said to us, he says, even though we jammed, he said this, he said that we jammed. Look at all that we had. We had the Muhammad Speaks, we had all these businesses, but we were superficial. We were too superficial in our study. We have to become more deeper in our study. All right. And it's very important that we know about the domestic life, and we understand that thoroughly, okay? And we understand who Master Farad Muhammad is, who Allah is, because that's where they're gonna come. You know, that's where they're gonna come. They're gonna come with that. And Abdul Rahman Muhammad, he doesn't believe that we're Muslims, okay? So for him, it's a crusade. So we have to be ready for this, right? Because, you know, I watched that Netflix a couple of times, and I could see he's very sharp. He's just doing this on his own, but now he's probably getting funders, you know? I'm almost sure he's getting funding for part 2. They're gonna be like, man, you gotta take this to the next, you know, we gotta go after, we have to go over some people, because they just released exonerated those 2 brothers, right?
That's right.
So
that's right.
So who did it? Who did it? That's the question. We have to be ready. We have to be strategic and get ready for the onslaught. So we have to study. We have to get deeper than we were prior to 1975. Nothing wrong with that. You know, Mosque number 32, back in the day, used to be called eggheads, you know, because we were Brother Jabril and we studied, and we were studying all the time. Yeah, we have to have a balance. You have to be balanced. You can't just be always studying. You got to have a balance. We got to go sell the paper and do our duty, right? Door to door, sell the paper door to door. That's the way the minister wanted it done. I have the article, April 1979. He said to sell the paper door to door. The selling on the freeways and the no byways is a detriment. Gonna be a problem. Some brothers get killed. You know, so we have to start selling the paper correctly. But we need to study, become more deeper in our knowledge than we were prior to 1975. And that is what's going to help us to get over the next examination.
Powerful. Dr. Anthony, I look forward to meeting you, inshallah, in person, and really having dinner with you and hearing more of your history, and bringing you back for part 2, if you will, and
Yeah,
multiple
definitely.
parts, so we can go over different courses of study. I really vibe with your energy.
Definitely, I like to do that with you, and I want to, next time I'll share with you this book. This is all of the information that Yusuf Shah shared with me about FOI officers. And FOI, I call this the FOI Officers Manual, but it's a supplemental. This is everything, all our conversations about different topics. I put it into this little book. It's and I shared it with a few people, but I never got any feedback. But that's something I would like to talk to you and share that with you. You know,
absolutely.
and also also the teachers class and the ministry class, and how Brother Jabril was developing that. So I definitely would like to sit down with you and talk about that as well. Well, next time.
Yes, sir. And I want to ask, will you be selling the are you going to sell it? Like, how can we get it?
No, I wasn't selling it. I started putting all my notes and recordings. I had a brother Ashad who used to work for the Final Call. He helped me to put it together. and we transcribed things from tapes, because I recorded Shah. We record him, and unfortunately, most of those tapes got lost in storage, but I have the book, and it's the body of knowledge, things that Captain Shah shared with me about being an officer, you know, being a FOI officer. It's not official. It's not official. I did send a copy to the minister, and well, who knows if he got it or not? You know, the enemy probably got it and tore it up. You know, but I don't know. I gave it to certain people. I gave it to the brother captain here, brother Captain Andrew in Baltimore. I made him a copy. I sent a couple copies out to different people to have it. You know, I never published it or anything of that nature. But it's the complete our interviews, and I will put it into, you know, I put it into a book form. Our conversation, and this was at the Brother Jabril told me I should do that. He says you need to put all that information into a book form, you know, so brothers could have it later on, and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely we'll make a copy and share it to you.
Yes, sir. I must say I'm very fascinated and interested. We have one more question for you, sir. What would you like your legacy to be?
That I was a good brother, and that I was, you know, I did my duty, you know, and I'm still doing my duty. I'm not going to stop until my eyes are closed, you know. That I continue to do my duty as best as I possibly could, on the inside and the outside. You know, because there were times when I would, you know, that my spirit would go down and I would be out of the ranks for a while, but I still have love for this work. You know, I still have love for this work and for all of the people that made an impact in my life, you know, and sisters too, Sister Nafisa, and, you know, Sister AT, you know, Sister Sharima, you know, all these were people that made an impact on my life. And, you know, in addition to Brother Jabril and Captain Yusuf Shah and Brother Rod Ambrose and his wife, and the list goes on, Brother Amin in Phoenix and his wife, they all made an impact in my life as a young Muslim. And for that, I would never forget them, and I don't forget them. I keep them all in my prayers, you know, and my legacy is just that I was a good father, a good brother, a good FOI.
All praise to Allah, powerful. I'm glad that we have connected and we're able to spread this information with the people across the world. And that if anybody wants to go back and see the interview we did with Sister AT, Sister Sharima, Brother Amin, and his wife, we have all of those on the People's Podcast. So now that you're saying these names, even though I never met Brother Amin in person or his wife, I interviewed him, so I feel connected. When you said those names, I was like, hey, I know who that is.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that was a good brother right there. That brother's a good brother. He was responsible. Him and Sister Marguerite, they were responsible for making me move to Phoenix.
Powerful. Yes, sir. Well, this is Joshua Leonard Muhammad signing off of the People's Podcast. Assalamu alaikum, sir. And thank you all for watching.
All right. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.